Hello, everybody. This is Jade with the Octopus Literary Podcast. This is episode 4 of our coverage of Old Man's War by John Scalzi. We're covering chapters 10, 11, and 12. And these chapters are pretty rough. So let's get right into it. So just to recap, the last sentence of the last section was, "My era of war had begun." And so we start off this section, or this chapter, with the primed for the idea that John is going to be doing more violent things. He is going to be thinking like a soldier and acting like a soldier in a way that he hasn't yet. Or at least hasn't until the last battle that he was in. So with that in mind, we start with a sentence that is effectively a punch to the face, which is, "Maggie was the first of the old farts to die." Now, when I was reading this, or when I was reading last week's section, I really try not to see what happens in the next section. But unfortunately, this was just on the next page, and I did accidentally skim over the sentence, "Maggie was the first of the old farts to die." This is a sentence that's supposed to hit you really hard, so let's break down why. So in this whole section, we describe the circumstances of Maggie's death, and we talk about the colony that she's protecting, and who is attacking it, and what is happening to her shipmates. And without this sentence, that is, "Maggie was the first of the old farts to die," you can hold out hope that that Maggie can get out of it, right? You are looking for opportunities for her to escape. You are too focused on the question, is she going to get out? We've mentioned a couple times before that some of the sentences make it feel like this is John's memoir that he's writing several years from now, and starting off the section with this sentence makes you feel just this utter hopelessness that the action has already occurred, and there's nothing that you, the audience, can hope for, and there's nothing that John can do about it. It's just sad. And it also primes us for the next couple of chapters where, spoilers, a lot of the other old farts die. In fact, most of them. And so by saying the first of the old farts, you're saying, guess what? More of the old farts die. And I'm sure we expected this, but in the back of my mind, I was kind of thinking, this is a several book series. Maybe they'll make it for a little while. They don't. So effectively, Maggie is sucked out into space and kept alive by her combat unitard. And she realizes that she's not going to be able to be rescued at all. And so she, with what energy she has left, she shoots at the opposing ship and starts to descend towards the atmosphere of Temperance, the planet that they're defending. And she knows that she will burn up in atmosphere, basically. So she composes the death poem, Jisei, because she was a professor of Eastern religions. And the haiku goes, "Do not mourn me, friends. I fall as a shooting star into the next life." And not only is this a really beautiful way of wrapping up Maggie's character, but it's also some neat foreshadowing as to what's going to happen at the end of this section. Maybe not foreshadowing is not the right word, but it shows a thematic through line between Maggie and what happens to John at the end of chapter 12. But we'll get there when we get there. So after this, John speaks briefly in his inner monologue about how he misses her and he wishes that she didn't die. But then we get a page break, and we never think about Maggie again. And we cut to about 3 months after the battle in last week's episode, where John has fully integrated into the CDF forces. So he talks about how when recruits first come onto their ship Modesto, they are effectively shunned, right? For two reasons. One, they're not part of the club, which is they haven't fought the enemy yet. And two, they're replacing somebody who died. So they only ever get fresh recruits when somebody is killed. So when you see this new face who is trying to be your friend, trying to be friendly to you, the only thing you can think about is how cheap of a replacement they are for the person that you lost. And for this reason, there's very little to no respect for the recruits who come into the ship immediately. He says that after their first battle, he and Alan are treated much better, and this makes sense. You know, I'm sure everyone reading this can empathize with the feeling of being excluded until you're accepted. I mean, it's human nature. And also needing to know more about a person or know that they belong in a group in order to accept them or relate to them. These soldiers' lives are defined by the violence they have committed at this point. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's what their life is. So having to interact with someone who doesn't understand is uncomfortable, and they might as well wait the next few days until the next battle. So with that established, let's talk about Mr. Thaddeus Bender. He's a senator. He was a former ambassador he was a senator from Massachusetts. He was a former ambassador to France, Japan, and the United Nations. He was the Secretary of State, and now he's a member of Platoon B. So this guy's kind of a big deal, right? If you're the ambassador to South Antarctica, you haven't been entrusted with a huge amount of responsibility. But he was the ambassador to the United Nations. So, and he was also the Secretary of State. So let's start off with, this is a guy who spent his whole life thinking about international relations. And just keep that in mind as we go through this next chapter. So we open up this section with John talking to Bender, or actually just Bender talking to John about his political opinions, and John explains to us why he doesn't think they are particularly valid. Sorry guys, I forgot the other set of lights. So John describes Thaddeus Bender as this guy who is going around to each of the recruits trying to establish a personal relationship with them, and everybody makes fun of him behind his back for being on a campaign effectively. But I think this is kind of a strange complaint. He can't possibly be campaigning for anything. It's not a popularity contest. He's just trying to make friends, and he's alone in space without anyone he's ever known for the first time. I mean, they just don't like this guy. There's no real reason. They just don't like him. Or actually, there is a reason, and we're about to see what it is. So Bender is sitting with a bunch of our temporary main characters, including Viveros, one of John's squad leader, Alan, and actually I'm not sure Alan's in this conversation, but John is. And Bender explains that he doesn't think that the CDF needs to be fighting as many of the aliens as they are. And at this point, because of what we saw last week with the Kansu, we're thinking the same thing that John is thinking, which is, this guy's an idiot, right? The Kansu are an incredible fighting force that were just going to kill everybody if they didn't fight back. This guy's just some hippie tree hugger, right? And that's exactly what all of the other soldiers are thinking. And so at the beginning of this conversation, you, the audience, are thinking that this guy is an idiot. He talks about how he thinks that violence is simple, which insults most of the soldiers at this conversation because this is their life, right? It's difficult for them, and it's what defines them. So even though he has a point, they don't want to hear it. So Bender says that the CDF should be trying to make peace with the majority of the creatures that they're currently fighting. And we haven't seen any creatures that are worth making peace with, right? I mean, we remember the oyster people from last week that we're apparently allies with, so I'm sure the humans are perfectly capable of being friends with whoever they want to be friends with, right? So then we find out about the Wadians. I've heard somebody else pronounce it Wahadians. I'm just going to go with Wadians, sorry. So we find out that the Wadians are a less technologically advanced species who has been trying to populate what's called the Earnhardt system, which is a system that has multiple habitable planets in it. So basically they are a species that has really just achieved spaceflight, and they want to go for the easy system because they can't really go after any of the more difficult ones yet. And the plan on the humans, and so the humans want the Earnhardt system because it's easy to populate, and because the Wades are less technologically advanced, they decide they are going to smash the Wadians into submission. It says, since the Wade would not take the hint and stay out of the Earnhardt system, the plan was to skip to Wade space, smash their spaceport and major industrial zones, and set their expansionary capabilities back a couple of decades or so. And this is the bit where you, the reader, are supposed to start thinking that the situation is not what you were told 6 chapters ago. Because if this was real life, this would be there would be large protests about this, right? You're gonna tie down a people who is trying to become more technologically advanced by setting their expansionary capabilities back a couple decades or so. That's morally bankrupt and cruel. And we're not even to what they actually do. So at this point, you start to realize that John has drank the Kool-Aid, right? In fact, Bender tells us that he's done research on the Wades in preparation for their upcoming fight, and he doesn't think that they're an enemy worth fighting. And they talk a little bit about the philosophy of negotiation. And John actually tells Bender, damn real live people getting in the way of your peaceful ideals. And I believe this is the first, so this is actually the first opinionated thing that John says in dialogue in this conversation. He's effectively telling Bender that negotiation is not an option, and that Bender is too idealistic. And I'd like to go back to that previous point that Bender is a professional negotiator with 50 years experience. John doesn't really have a hill to stand on here, but he has become accepted by the club. He doesn't want to deviate from the rest of his squad. He wants to defend the actions of his squad because they accept him, because they're people that he has connections to. So Viveros cuts down Bender at this point, and she says, you're wrong, because until you fight, what you know or what you think you know out here means shit to me and everybody else. So in other words, you're wrong because I don't like you. And second of all, you're not allowed to question orders. And Bender says, much evil has been done under the guise of just following orders. I hope we never have to find ourselves using the same excuse. So remember back in the very first section of this book when John signed away his ability to question orders or refuse an order? This is why. It's because the CDF is getting into unnecessary fights, and they don't want people to be able to say no. Now, in this case, the soldiers are keeping each other in check. They're not allowing each other to question orders. But it's very apparent that nobody does this, right? The soldiers aren't thinking. They're probably too exhausted. So Viveros storms off at this, and John explains that she has a tragic backstory, and this makes Bender feel bad. But it doesn't change his mind. It doesn't actually. This isn't having a tragic backstory, which is that her whole family was killed by people who were just following orders. This doesn't actually. This isn't an argument, right? This doesn't make a point. It just means I don't want to talk to you because I don't like what you're saying. So we've yet to actually see anything that indicates that Bender is wrong. The only thing we have is a biased narrator who wants to be part of the soldier club. So then we smash cut to the actual battle on the Wade. And this actually hurt to read, right? So they are blasting buildings and structures, but avoiding shooting live targets. Who do they think is in buildings and structures? Mannequins? What the heck? So it turns out that the CDF opened up a divisionary offensive in the Earnhardt system several days before to lure Wadian ships there to support the battle. So they lured all of the Wade defense to another planet and then attacked the planet. This is like taking the gimpy kid's wheelchair away and then beating him up, right? In fact, this is like taking the kid with a physical disability and then taking away his wheelchair and then beating him up until he has a mental disability, because that's actually what they're doing. Their whole goal here is to set back the Wade's technology by, it says several decades, but it's actually probably several centuries. They destroy all of their ability to produce anything. They destroy their mines, their roads, their buildings. They talk about how most of the rest of the population will be killed off by famine and disease. They're causing an apocalypse. These people are 70+% of them are going to die after the humans leave. Yeah, it says the local space was cleared of threats. The CDF leisurely targeted industrial centers, military bases, mines, refineries, desalination plants, dams, solar arrays, harbors, space launch facilities, major highways, and any other target that would require the Wadians to rebuild it before rebuilding their interstellar capabilities. This is a horrific terrorist attack, the likes of which would make any country in the United States public enemy number one. Think about what would happen if someone did this to us, whatever country you're in, right? John has become an unwitting villain protagonist in 3 off-screen months. He's just going with the flow. He wants to hang with his new buds and effectively be a terrorist. The humans are the Klingons for the rest of Wade's species history. It goes without saying that there's no chance for diplomacy now. But my opinion on... Originally I had a poor opinion of the CDF, and then I went, you know what, I was wrong. These guys are really just defending humanity. No, they're so much worse than I thought they were. This is deplorable. Anything else the CDF does from this point on cannot justify what they did here. Anyway, when I was reading this, my blood pressure probably tripled, and now it's up to about 1.5. Only because I've read this before. Yeah, at some point it says CDF intelligence suspected major casualties downstream of the destroyed dams, but that really couldn't be helped. That really couldn't be helped? You destroyed the dams. Ugh. Anyway, it says the CDF's official statement is actively going after the civilian population was inhumane. Really? Um, and then we cut back to the actual narration of what John is doing. And he is babysitting Bender, the ambassador, and they're attacking just a center in their capital, and in front of John, it says directly in front of me at 40 meters was an abstract sculpture of some description. I held it as Bender and I ran. Never much liked abstract art. All right, John knows absolutely nothing about these people. He has no idea if this is an abstract sculpture. Even though it is also like a completely degenerate action to destroy this sculpture because you don't like abstract art. Anyway, so John and Bender go and fight some Wade soldiers. So at least they're not fighting civilians, but still, and it becomes apparent that Bender isn't not following orders. Like, he doesn't like what they're doing, but it doesn't change the fact that he's doing it, right? He's not talking the talk, but he is walking the walk, which lends him more credibility than, say, Watson from last week, who was talking about how much of a badass he was and then couldn't follow through. They shoot some people, and John says, I don't know what a live Wadian smells like, but a dead one smells positively fucking rank. John's made a full transition to Jarhead, right? He hates these people because they're the target. It's his job to hate them right now, so he does. So he hates the way they smell. He hates their art. He hates the way they smell when they die. He's not thinking. He's not. Why would he? He's in the club. So John and Bender shove several of the Wade soldiers out a window. And so they're able to just completely clear this building of any life. And then it turns out that some of the surviving civilians have gathered in an amphitheater and have started chanting, which is something that Bender had told everybody about earlier. When he read up on the Wades, he found out that they do this chant thing, and he used this as evidence that they're a people worth protecting. They're sentient, and they have a culture, and part of their culture is this chant. And so when they start chanting, Bender is thrilled, and he tries to explain to everybody, look, they're doing a thing that humans might have developed, as a tradition if things had happened slightly differently. Everybody calls bullshit on Bender, and he says, well, they must be crying out for the violence to cease. Well, he says it's a prayer for peace. It has to be. They must know what we've done to their planet. They can see what we're doing to their city. Any people to whom this has been done must be crying for it to cease. And Vivero says, oh, you are so full of shit. And Bender's about to do something really stupid. But what he says here is correct, in my opinion. What the heck else would they be crying out for? They're sitting ducks. The humans have them on their backs. What else would they be praying for other than for this violence to stop? It's possible they're chanting about something humans would not understand, but Occam's razor, the simplest thing is probably the truth. However, Bender proves himself too stupid to live by going out and attempting to actually offer peace to the Wadians on behalf of the humans. This is he's really trying to make a point to the rest of the soldiers, which, like, respect for being the only person willing to rock the boat, but also, what a freaking idiot, right? So he comes and attempts to offer peace to the Wadians. And, maybe this would have worked before they blew up their planet, like, but no, he gets shot. Like 40,000 times. He gets shot 40,000 times. And then the human soldiers end up having to kill all of the civilians waiting in the amphitheater. So Bender unwittingly caused the death of more civilians and the direct killing of civilians by soldiers, which is crossing yet another line. That's the end of Bender. And at this point, I started to think that so Leon Deek died, Watson died, and now Bender died. And I started to think that the people who are dying are the people, or the idiots who are dying, are the people who are going against what the CDF wants. They are the boat rockers, right? They don't like what the CDF is doing, and the narrative punishes them for it. And that's supported by this very next conversation. So Viveros tells John after this that she thinks Bender was right, and that everything he said about the fact that the CDF just slaughters people by the billions is correct. Yes, he was an idiot and he died for it, but he wasn't necessarily wrong. And Viveros tells John that her intention is to become one of the top brass in the CDF so that she can change the policy. She can decide when they are and aren't going to go into battle. And that brings up a really interesting point, which is that in a human war, this wouldn't really happen, or it might, but there are vastly different factors at play in a war on Earth now. But the biggest one is public opinion. On Earth, people are able to inform themselves about the war. Okay, Americans are able to inform themselves about the wars that their country is in. I know that's not the case everywhere, and there are plenty of other countries where it is the case. But most humans are able to inform themselves about the war that their country is involved in and decide whether they want to support it, decide whether they want to participate. They can decide to leave if they can't decide to leave, but they could at least attempt to desert if they were really, really opposed. It's not the case here. There's nowhere for them to go. Your only option if you don't like this is suicide. And all of the recruits have been recruited with no information as to what they will be doing. So the humans just committed genocide. And if any of the people, well, if all of the old people who were signing up knew about this, the CDF's numbers would be vastly reduced. So of course they don't want people communicating with home. And then we find out, sticking with our through line, that people who rock the boat get killed. Viveros dies 2 months later. She is not able to change the system. And she is soon replaced by a guy named Whitford, who was decent enough as far as it went. So then we move on to chapter 11. And it says Thomas died because of something he ate. And at this point, I'm starting to do mental math about how many of the old farts are left. Are we going to get an old fart death at the beginning of every chapter? And the answer is no, based on the math, and also based on the fact that, spoilers, Susan dies at the end of this chapter. But it's another incredibly effective writing punch in the face. It also tells us that all of the old farts are dying as themselves, right? Maggie was able to compose the death poem as she died, and die as a shooting star. Thomas died because of something he ate. If you remember, one of his 2 character traits is that he likes food. Now, of course, he dies because of a mold that gets into his mouth. But it's still a death very reminiscent of the one thing that he really, really cares about. And this is important because John is not acting like himself now. He has become assimilated. The rest of the old farts are keeping to what the rest of the old farts are keeping to their original personalities and values. John isn't. Now it also says that as a matter of standard operating procedure, new colonies transmit a daily compilation of all colony data into a skip drone, which then skips back to Phoenix so that the colonial government can keep tabs on colony matters. There's literally no reason why the CDF isn't communicating with Earth if they're able to get a daily message from each colony, other than the fact that they don't want Earth to know about what they're doing. Yeah. They mentioned that Thomas and Susan were stationed on the Tucson. This is great because Thomas and Susan were actually separated, so somehow they got reunited, which is actually pretty neat. As you remember, they were bickering all the time, and then they eventually became fuck buddies. So it's nice to know that they were able to see each other again. But then Thomas dies because of a mold, and it just makes you, again, it impacts into you this feeling of hopelessness and this feeling that anything can kill you. The soldiers are just waiting for their turn to die, effectively. And then we cut back to John's perspective. And it says, conquering the universe was beginning to get to me. Finally. Come on, man. It turns out they've been committing genocide on huge scale on a daily basis, right? It says they were ambushing Gindelian soldiers as they returned to their eyries, slashing their huge wings with beams and rockets that sent them tumbling and screeching down sheer 2,000-meter cliff faces. So these are flying people. They are waiting for them to return home and cutting their wings off and dropping them off of cliffs. This is monstrous. Nothing short. There's a couple other examples here. But we talk about the Covabonda and how the humans used to have a colony here that was... the humans used to have a colony here, but there was a virus, and so they left, and then the Covabonda moved in, and then after the humans developed a virus, 63 years later, they decided they were going to come in, kill all the Covabonda, and take the planet back. Why? Why? It's not like there's not enough planets. Space is big. It turns out that the Covabonda are 1 inch tall. And at this point, my question is, who the hell are the humans allied with? Nobody would want to ally with these people. And they shouldn't. They're horrible. And yeah, there's a lot of other horrible aliens in this universe, but the humans are probably the worst that we've seen. The other species that are as bad as the humans that we've seen are species that are cooking and eating the humans. So at minimum, they are getting some use out of their prey. The humans don't. The humans don't get any use out of what they're doing. That's my accusation. So the humans go in and just stomp with their boots. They kill this entire species, or at least this entire colony, just by stomping on them. And John finally, after, I guess it's about, oh, actually, they say later it's been a year. After a year of this, John finally breaks down. And if you just heard a noise, that was my cat. So John finally breaks down in tears. He sees himself as Godzilla stomping on the people. And he says that there ought to be consequences to their actions. And like I said, there's no way for there to be consequences because there's no oversight to the CDF. There's no government. There's no public opinion. The CDF can just do whatever they want. They can tell people to do whatever they want them to do. And there's no reason for them to ever stop doing so. John says, I'm a monster. You're a monster. We're all fucking inhuman monsters, and we don't see a damn thing wrong with it. So John is called into a meeting with his Lieutenant Keys and some other of the top brass within the Modesto, and they're asking him, like, dude, what's wrong with you? Why are you crying? It was just an entire species of 1-inch tall people. Get over it. And they say that everybody after a year pretty much starts to feel really bad. We get a nice line from Alan. He says the reason he's okay with it is, I'm a seething cauldron of disconnected rage on the inside, Lieutenant. I really like Alan. So all of the officers go around and start talking about what they miss about Earth, and it's all silly things. And I don't want to knock this because it's the little things that matter, right? It's all little silly things like chocolate chip cookies and roller coasters, and John says that what he really misses is his wife. And everybody else talks about how they don't miss their spouses, but John talks about how there's no stable ground out here. There's nothing out here I really feel safe about. My marriage has had its ups and downs like anyone. When it came down to it, I knew it was solid. I miss that sort of security and that sort of connection with someone. Part of what makes us human is what we mean to other people and what people mean to us. I miss meaning something to someone, having that part of being human. Do you remember in the very second paragraph of this book when John goes on this long tirade about Sandy, the woman who's buried next to his wife, and how nobody remembers Sandy, and what matters is the connections to other people? Yes, that is the overarching theme of this book, and more than likely this entire series. Everybody dies. All the old farts die. John's gonna die. You're gonna die. But what makes us human is what we mean to other people and what those people mean to us. And then immediately from there, we cut to Susan's death. And at that point, I have to go let my cat in. She's clawing at the bottom of my door. Come on. So at this point, we cut to Susan's death. Please excuse the cat asshole. And nope, that's my computer. At this point, we cut to Susan's death, and I started to think at this point that all of that romantic shit that the CDF was talking about last week about, we picked old people because you care about your children back on Earth, it's bullshit. What they really want is a fighting force that everyone is going to forget about. These people have said their goodbyes to their family, and they know that they are not going back. No one is going to question their deaths. No one is going to question why they haven't been writing or under what circumstances they died. The CDF wants people that are expendable. And it's sick. Susan, the one who is always arguing with everybody else, she dies fighting humans. Remember how I said that that the soldiers might be asked to fight colonists? Yeah, these colonists are horrible, and they feed Susan to a creature of the deep. But the CDF does actually have to fight humans. everything that I was afraid of happening has happened in these 2 chapters. And finally, at Susan's death, John says, I no longer worried about it making me any less human than I was before. He has decided to stop caring. He's given up. And so then we move on to chapter 12. And it starts out with the sentence, those of us who were at the Battle for Coral remember where we were when we first heard the planet had been taken. And this is a great way to establish tension. It makes you start asking questions in your brain. Okay, what is the battle for Coral, and why do you remember? Well, obviously because it's really bad. The circumstances are really bad. The battle for Coral is capitalized. No other battle's been capitalized. And then we jump into an infuriatingly off-topic conversation where Alan explains how warp speed teleportation, which they call skipping, works in this universe. And thanks, I guess, but at this point, you're supposed to be thinking, okay, no, tell me what the battle for Coral is. You jerk. You asked me, you made me come up with a bunch of questions, and now I can't know the answer. So Alan gives us some sci-fi bullshit about how they, rather than moving really fast, are teleporting to another universe and just picking their destination, and how this means that all of their jumps that they've made have separated them from everyone else who is not on the ship. And 2 things about this conversation. One, it annoys me when we use the phrase English please as a joke about how difficult science is to understand, because the first paragraph that Alan says is perfectly understandable to most readers. It says, it takes an object from one universe, like the Modesto, and pops it into another universe. The problem is that we refer to it as a drive. It's not really a drive at all because acceleration is not a factor. The only factor is the location within the universe. And everybody says, no, I don't understand. That's too complicated for my tiny pea brain. This is not that complicated. So then Alan spends the next 3 pages explaining this. And, this is my only complaint for this section, but I'm complaining. So Alan explains this for about 3 pages. The other thing that we're supposed to gain from this conversation is this one line. So you and I are all that's left of our universe, I said. So just last chapter, John said that the thing that he misses about Earth is constance. Being able to go home to the same place every day, knowing the same people, being married to the same wife. And he says there's no anchor here in space, but he does have one. He does have one person who has been a constant the whole time, and it's Alan. Alan is the only person left who is part of who was part of John's original universe. And we're going to revisit this in a very tragic way at the end of this section. So we finish up the conversation where we find out that this is the conversation that John, Alan, and Ed were in when they found out about the Coral Massacre. It says, in whatever universe you were in, it was horrifying stuff. And so this whole section has been building up tension, and we still don't release tension here. We just know that this is where they were. Then we launch into a long explanation of how Coral was one of the first colonies that humans settled, and it's actually extremely suited to humans. Humans don't have to terraform anything; they can just live off the land. They don't really have to grow crops. But this other species called the Ray, who think humans are delicious, came and just decided to eat everybody. They also lost a bunch of the coral on their own planet and needed to get it from somewhere else. Also, coral, the planet, is covered in coral, the substance, which is, So we get like several pages of description on how the Ray prepare food out of humans. There's cooking shows where they explain how to prepare a human neck, etc. And Lieutenant Keyes tells everybody that they are going to surprise attack the Ray. So the Ray are expecting them to arrive in about 8 days. They're going to arrive. They're going to skip right now without any reinforcements. They're just going to take out as many of the Ray ships as they can. They want to. They're basically going to go out in a blaze of glory, is what's unsaid here, but everybody understands it. And the soldiers are understandably distressed over this. They do not want to go out in a blaze of glory. They want to live. But Keyes convinces them that, like, no, this is a serious battle, and we need to be there. So they agree. And at the end of this conversation, they mention what's called the Sparrow Hawk, which is a ship that carries something called the Ghost Brigades. And John says he's never heard of it before, but it sounds familiar. And for those of you who haven't read this a bunch of times over and over again, like me, it was mentioned when Leon Deek died. They said that he would be another soldier. Okay, they joked that he would be another soldier for the Ghost Brigades. So the Ghost Brigades, here we find out they're basically special forces. They only show up at really, really bad fights. But it also tells us that we know that they have something to do with people who have died becoming part of the Ghost Brigades. And this has a pretty decent chance of becoming relevant at the end of this section. I'm not sure yet. So Alan, John, and both of their squads, because they're now both squad leaders, are waiting in a squad transport for when they arrive to the fight with the Ray at Coral. And when they jump out of slip space, or whatever it's called, they are immediately hit by Ray lasers. They know that they're coming. The Ray know the humans' battle plans, and this is really bad, obviously. So they have to escape the ship basically as it's going down around them. So everyone that John has been interacting with for the last couple of chapters, Keyes, Ed, probably, the other people that the top brass that he was talking to about his marriage, they're all dead, is what we find out. The only shuttle that we know makes it off is this one. And they pretend to be dead in the water. They do this by cutting their brain pal feed to the Modesto. It says they can use it to track us. Tell your squads verbally. Now, most of the time, these guys are communicating via brain pal. But in this instance, in order to survive, they have to revert to how they are as humans by talking out loud to each other. Insert dumb millennial joke here. They decide they're going to slowly drift like debris towards the planet and then try to hide out on the planet for a couple of days, just living off the land, which is what the humans have been doing. John gives some small praise to Fiona in order to encourage her, and it shows that John is still making fast friends with everybody on the ship. He's still keeping his same consistent personality outside of battle, but we're not seeing it on screen because we know what John acts like. We just want to know how John acts in a new situation, which is in battle. In order to get down, they have to turn on their engine to be able to maneuver through the atmosphere. Otherwise, they'll just get torn up so much that they'll just die. But they when they turn on the engine, they're immediately targeted by the Ray, and they're shot. Everybody dies except for John. I didn't think that John was going to get this injured, so it's rather shocking to read these injuries that would normally kill a person. It says, the sharp pain of something striking my jaw and taking it away with it, gurgling as I try to scream, gray smart blood flung from the wound by centrifugal force. And it says, my foot swings directly up where my jaw used to be, and I become perhaps the first person in the history of man to kick myself in his own uvula. You don't normally read this in fiction because normally people would die if this happens. So it comes across as incredibly shocking because no matter what, you've probably only read something like this a couple of times. So John lands on the ground and he breaks a bunch of bones, and then above him, Alan is impaled on a tree. And Alan stares down at him and transmits over Brainpal, "I hope I can see the constellations where I'm going." And he sends it 3 times. So this is Alan dying as himself, just like all of the other old farts. But B, remember how we just talked about how Alan is the only person that John has? He's the only person that is even from his universe. Now that Alan is dead, John is completely alone. And at this point, the aliens come by and they decide to not even kill him because he's too close to being dead. And then some humans come up and they discuss whether to just mercy kill him. And John thinks that one of the humans who has come for him is Kathy. He says, "I weep. I know I'm dead. I don't mind." And the soldier that he thinks is Kathy goes ahead and clarifies that he's never seen, well, he or she has never seen John before. So this is not some sci-fi shenanigans where Kathy's back. This is John is hallucinating. And it says, John slips away into another universe. So my interpretation of this, and I could be proven wrong next week, is that John died, but that they were able to back up his consciousness and they're going to put him into a new body, potentially in the Ghost Brigades. Not sure. We just found out about these things, but it has been foreshadowed. But if that's the case, then John just lost the thing that symbolizes his connection to himself. It's his wedding ring. Brought up a couple times that John's love for Kathy is what anchors him. And what anchors him to that is the fact that he wears his wedding ring. Or it's not that he needs that, but it's a symbol. He mentions it every so often. And if they actually take him and put him in a new body, he won't get it back. And that's going to be really interesting. Because John has now lost he's lost his ability to connect with other people, as he's become a genocidal maniac unwittingly. He's lost every person he's ever had a connection to. And now he's lost his body. He's definitely at his lowest point. This is the lowest point that we refer to in literature before moving into the final act. And if you just go to the next page, you'll notice that we're moving into part 3 of 3. So from this point on, we've got the climax, right? John has lost everything and everyone. So I'm very eager to see what happens next week. So the discussion question for this week is pretty easy. It's not deep and philosophical since this whole episode was pretty rough. My question is, if you were launched out into space, never to see any human pleasures again other than interactions with new people, but not even people you know, what is the one thing that you would miss most about Earth? I know you can't actually know this until you are actually flung out into space, but what would you miss most about Earth? So thanks for watching. Next week we'll be back with chapters 13, 14, and 15, which is the first half of part 3. We are currently 66% of the way through this book. Anyway, see you next week.